All of my biggest fish in my life have come as a result of a deep crank. It is definitely my confidence go-to bait for catching the biggest fish in every body of water. Now, we are coming into post-spawn and summertime fishing, which is setting up prime for deep diving crankbaits. So today, we're gonna break down our favorite deep diving crankbaits. We're gonna explain which baits we're using, why we're using them, how we're using them, so that you guys can catch the biggest fish in your bodies of water this year. So if you're ready, let's do it. Welcome to the Hookup Tackle. The Hookup Tackle is the world's largest showcase of Megabass products, featuring baits and colors not found at any other dealer. The Hookup also offers a wide display of OSP, Evergreen, Deps, Lucky Craft, Jackal, and many more. The Hookup Tackle is owned and operated by family, is staffed by guides and verified tackle nerds who love helping anglers elevate their craft. If you're in the Phoenix area, we'd love to have you stop by our showroom and check out the wonderful world of Megabass and the Hookup for yourself. If you shop online, there are almost 10,000 SKUs of Megabass products alone, with hundreds of other companies and new products being added daily. So next time you're looking for that hard to find bait, that color your fish have never seen before, or maybe you just want to elevate your game, look at thehookuptackle.com. Welcome back, my friends. I am Ben with the Hookup Tackle, aka the Tackle Otaku on Instagram, being filmed by my buddy Jeffrey the King. We are the Hookup Tackle USA. Today, we are going to talk about deep diving crankbaits. Jeff, what does deep diving mean to you?
It's a crankbait that's deep.
So, but what is deep?
I'm saying, like, it starts at 15 foot and goes down to 25.
Okay, so every part of the world, deep is going to mean different things to you, right? So what we are focusing on today is we are focusing on fish that are set up on what we would consider deep structure. So those are going to be, points, bottom of creeks, reefs, things that are going to be in that 15 to 25 foot zone. Now, we are also going to spend a little bit of time breaking down some of our favorite baits for running like break-offs, right? Because I know a lot of you guys live on impoundments in rivers where, it's lots of flats and it just kind of breaks, and that's going to be your deep water, right? Edge of flats, channel breaks, that kind of stuff that might be in like that 12 to 15 foot zone. So we'll touch a little bit on that as well. So, deep cranks, what is it about a crankbait that just, dude, they smoke big ones, Jeff. Mm-hmm. Jeff here is a swim bait guy, and we have lots of conversations on, baits that just catch giants. And in the conventional world, if we take swim baits out, I would say more giants are caught on a crankbait. See, it's got to be either a crankbait or a jig.
Yeah.
For me, it's a crankbait. They just love it. And there's so many different things that go into why a fish eats a crankbait. But really what it comes down to is you still have to make the right cast. You have to have the right angle. You have to have the right bait and understand what each bait is designed to do. And you come into a store like ours, literally every lure manufacturer makes crankbaits, right? Square bills, mid divers, deep divers. It can just get so overwhelming, right? But there are special crankbaits from different manufacturers that do special things. So today we're going to kind of break down our approach as to the baits that, from our experience, just smoke them everywhere we go, and how we fish them and why they do what they do. So when I'm thinking deep crank, right, I'm thinking one of three things usually, right? I either want a bait that is just kind of grinding down on the bottom, right? This is going to be on points, reefs, maybe some of these ledges that we are talking about, boulder piles, things that maybe I'm just making a long cast and the fish are going to be set up in that, 15, 18 foot zone, just off an area where they might be able to move up and feed or move down and feed, but they're kind of in that, deep-ish zone, right? I want a bait that can get down there and just bounce around and grind. So these are my grinding crankbaits. The other two categories that I consider is I like a crankbait that can kind of get down and tick the tops of things. So for instance, out here on the West Coast, we have a lot of very deep water, right? We have lakes like Lake Pleasant, Lake Powell, Lake Mead, you know, Clear Lake, all these different places where sometimes the fish just suspend in big trees. It might be in 80 feet of water, but there's a tree that comes up, you know, 50 feet and the fish are just suspended on the tops, right? So I want a crankbait that it can get down and kind of tick the tops of the trees, tick the tops of the grass, not necessarily grinding down there in the rocks, more of just a depth control bait to get down there and tick the tops of things. And then the third is my ultra deep divers, right? My bait that I just need to get down there and dredge as absolutely deep as I can go, 25 foot, 28 foot, 30 foot sometimes, right? And just really get it down there into that deep zone and present a big bait down there. So those are the 3 categories we're going to talk about. We're going to dive in right now. So we're going to start with just our grinding crankbaits. So these are baits where if I'm not sure what's happening, but I know they are probably off a little bit deeper, I can take these baits, I can run bank, I can just find some deeper stretches and just kind of parallel cast and just grind it into riprap or rocky banks. I can position off the end of a point, fire off and drag it and bang it around the point. I can do a lot of different things with these baits. So usually my starting point for the grinding style bait is the OSP DR series. So I'm a huge fan of the Blitz Max DR. The Blitz EX DR is the other one that I utilize a lot. And basically I just do it based on the size of the body. Now, the Blitz Max DR for me is a great one for getting down in that kind of 14, 15 foot zone. The EXDR can get a couple feet deeper. And again, a lot of this is going to depend on the line, right? So if you need extra depth out of your bait, you're going to have to downsize your line. You're going to have to drop to a 10 pound, you know, or a 12 pound. If you're fishing a little shallower or it's really snaggy, then bump up to like a 14 pound. 14 pound is usually my sweet spot for my line. But here's a look at the OSP series of baits. So this is the Blitz Max DR, Blitz Max DR, Blitz EX DR. You can see it's just more of a profile thing for me than anything. Both of these baits, you'll notice it's got a little bit of a knock in there. So it's subtle, right? It's not super intrusive. Pretty similar, so they're going to get a little bit of vibration, a little bit of sound. Both of these baits are great at grinding. You get them down and just crank them down through the rocks. They're going to deflect great. You notice that the lips are relatively narrow, so they're going to maintain a pretty tight wobble. So the thinner this is, right, the faster it goes the other direction. So typically the tighter the movement of the bait. The wider the lip is going to be, the more water it pushes before it can go back the other direction. So typically the wider movement of the bait as far as the lips go. Now, the profile of the bait will have an effect there too. So this is more of a round bait, thin lip, so it's kind of a hybrid. It's kind of an in-between a wide wobble and a tight wobble, which is usually why it makes it a great starting point, because it can accomplish a lot of different things. So if you guys are banging this into boulder piles, points, reefs, that kind of stuff, in that 12 to 16 foot zone, you can't go wrong with either of those. The other bait that I love to throw in that depth is the Megabass Deep-X 300. So pretty much the same thing. You're going to be about a 3/4 of an ounce. It's going to be perfect for that 15, 16 foot zone. You got a lot of noise, right? So it's great for just getting down there, banging around the rocks, creating some commotion. Lucky Craft also makes an amazing one. This is the LC 3.5 X18. This bait gets overlooked a lot. You know, a lot of people think of Lucky Craft crankbaits and they think, you know, LC 1.5. Right? They think square bill. But they make some amazing deep diving crankbaits as well. The X18 has that nice kind of internal knock to it. So it's got that kind of low pitch sound to it. Weighs 3/4 an ounce, so it casts like a dream. It's a much wider lip. So it's going to, and a wider body, so it's going to have a wider movement down there. So I think that this bait has a similar movement to something like an 8XD from Strike King without the extreme depth that that gets. So it's kind of a special bait, and when they want that wider, more aggressive motion, they definitely smoke that guy. The other one that we will utilize, especially when casting is a problem. So if it's really windy and I need to maximize my casting distance, it's hard to beat the Evergreen Combat Crank Series. So the 400 and the 4.8 or the 480. These guys are going to get down again into that 12 to 16 foot zone. The Combat Cranks have an amazing cast system in there. There's a single tungsten weight on the inside that shifts from the front all the way to the back. They've built the casting system to go all the way to the back, so when it shifts, it literally is sitting back here all the way at the end. So it's like a rocket sending it out there. So great casting distance on these guys. And again, it's gonna be kind of a hybrid, not quite so wide, not super tight, kind of an in-between, similar to the OSP. Great crankbait. So this is my arsenal for grinding around, just casting and grinding. Setup wise for these baits, you could certainly get by throwing any of these on what you would consider to be your, you know, deep crank rod. For me, these are more of a kind of in between for me. So the combo that I throw these baits on almost all the time is my Megabass Valkyrie. This is my 7-1 medium heavy. This is a tough rod to get. Every time we get them in, they fly out of here and sell out quickly. Really just because it's a beautiful action. It's got that nice, you know, bend through the middle. It's a glass carbon composite, but it's still very powerful. So it's got enough strength to handle these deeper divers, but it's short enough and easy enough to where if you're just running bank and you don't need to make these, you know, epic long casts out in the middle of nowhere, it's a very easy rod to maneuver. Daiwa Steez A in either a 6-to-1 or 7-to-1. Gear ratios aren't really important here for me. None of these baits are gonna really roll if you go too fast. So 7-to-1 is a great option. 6-to-1 is a good option as well. Somewhere in there, in more that mid to low high speed is great for this kind of fishing. 14-pound straight fluorocarbon for me is usually my starting point, and I will go down to 12 or 10 if I need to get extra depth. I will go up to 16 or 18 if it's really gnarly, or I need to keep it a little bit higher, or if there's a lot of cover that I need to kind of tick, then I can go up in line. But 14-pound fluoro is a great starting point. While we are on the topic of grinding, let's take a second and talk about some of these like flat breaks and ledges, because I know a lot of you guys will deep crank those. So any of those baits we just spoke about are great options for just getting and paralleling a ledge, a flat break, and getting it down there and banging around on some of those rocks. A lot of times though, I will upsize my bait and go to a bigger profile, but I still want to keep it in that 12 to 15 foot zone. I don't want to throw a 10XD or a Big M75 and get it down there in 25 feet. But the fish that are sitting in that ledge, in that zone break, you know, they're feeding on gizzard shad, they're feeding on bluegills, they're feeding on larger prey. So I don't want to throw a little 2.5 or 3 inch crankbait. I want to throw something with some size. So these are some baits that we will utilize when we're making parallel casts and the fish are in that 12 to 15 foot zone, sitting, you know, right in that area. So starting point, there's a couple of them. So this is the Megabass Big M 4.0. So this is the original Big M that Megabass released. This is a great one for covering, again, that kind of 12 to 15 foot zone, depending on the pound test that you use. Now the Big M series, and we'll talk more about the Big M here in a second. The Big M series is designed a little bit different than most other crankbaits. You'll notice that it's wider here at the bottom, thinner at the top, right? So it's got a unique shape to it. And even though this looks like a square bill, because it's got such a small lip, this guy will dive down there and get into that 12 to 15 foot zone. Now, even though this crankbait is going to be pushing that 2-ounce envelope, it's a very easy crankbait to throw. One of the big, you know, concerns and comments that we get all the time from guys is that the bigger you go in crankbaits, you just crank your arm off, right? And they can be very frustrating to fish. We can solve that by using the right gear, the right reel, the right rod, right? But a lot of it too depends on the bait. Some baits just crank harder than others. This is a flashing bait. So instead of this thing being this real wide movement that's just going to be down there pulsing like crazy, this is a flashing bait. So it's going to have a lot of top to bottom movement to it versus big side to side swings. So you can get a big bait like this that comes through the water effortlessly. So you're going to feel it vibrating down there, but it's just going to feel like a mid-depth crankbait to you. It's not going to be cranking your arm off, and they absolutely smoke it. It gives them that nice big profile that they want with the depth control in that zone. Now, the other bait that I utilize all the time, this has really become one of my favorites, is the OSP Blitz Magnum MR. Now this is a great one for, again, the same zone. You're going to be about 1.5 ounces on this guy. This is, again, kind of a in between a wide wobble and a tight wobble. It's got just a little bit of sound to it. Right, so it's a real subtle sound that comes through. It's got a great balance, great cover deflection, and you can just get it down there and just parallel cast and just bang those rocks. Anytime they're feeding on big threadfin, little gizzards, that kind of stuff, this guy absolutely smokes them. The other one that has gained a ton of popularity, they're hard to get, right? They sell out as fast as we get them, but when you see them, it's worth picking up. This is the Deps Evoke 4.0. So our friend Kenta designed this bait for Deps. This is again, just a big square bill, but because of its size and because of its build, it will get down there into those deeper zones. So what's special about the Evoke 4.0 is you can see it is basically just a Magnum size square bill, but it is balanced perfectly so that you can burn this bait. So with the Blitz Magnum MR, with the Big M 4.0, for me, those are profile baits, right? So when they fish want a bigger profile, I'm gonna chuck it out there and I'm gonna fish it pretty normal speed, just let it down there, kind of grind, but it's gonna give that big profile. The Evoke 4.0 is designed, you can really burn it. So you can fish this as fast as you can fish it. It's gonna bounce and deflect off cover and do all kinds of crazy stuff while giving that bigger profile. So if you need an extra trigger mechanism, if you need to really get an aggressive strike out of them, the Evoke 4.0 can be a great option for you. All right, back to that deeper water. So sometimes the fish are more of a suspended mode. They're sitting in deeper water, they're sitting in that 15 to 20 foot zone, but they're not necessarily sitting right on the bottom, right? They're not chilling on the end of a point, they're not chilling in a boulder field, they're suspended up in a tree, they're suspended just up in the water column, right? And there are certain crankbaits that are absolutely perfect for getting down to those fish that they respond to. So the two that I utilize all the time are these guys. This is the Megabass Deep Six, and this is the Lucky Craft Flat CB D20. Now, both of these crankbaits are relatively similar in approach. You're gonna have many more color options in this guy, limited color options, but just a different motion. So sometimes they want one, sometimes they want the other. So they both end up in my box. The Deep Six is a bait that's capable of getting down to that true 6 meter zone. So it's going to be a true 18 to 20, 21 foot diver, again, depending on the pound test that you're throwing. What I love about the Deep Six is, again, you're getting kind of that round shape, right? Kind of the same shape that you had in the Deep-X 300, but you get this very narrow lip. So it's going to tighten it up a little bit. It's going to have a very similar action to a shad or a baitfish that would typically be swimming more mid-column versus down, banging around the rocks. This is a very easy crankbait to manipulate the depth, okay? So it has one loud knocker in it, right? So it's giving you the sound that you need, but it's a bait that you could throw on 12 pound. You could get it down to 20 feet. You could throw it on 14 pound or keep it up at 18. You could throw it on 16 pound. You're gonna bring it up to 16 feet. You could throw it on 20 pound. It's gonna keep it to 14, 15 feet. So you can adjust the depth of the bait merely by going up in your line, and the bait's still gonna perform the same, which makes it very simple to tick the tops of whatever it is that you're trying to tick. Straight retrieve with this guy, I just wanna get it down, get it into a tree or bang the top of the tree, and then maybe just give it a pause, let it suspend for a second, and then back at it, right? It's a very easy one because it's gonna have a pretty deep dive to where if it does come in contact with something, I can just let it kind of chill. I can just kind of lift my rod tip up and over, and it'll just kind of deflect over. Comes through wood very, very easily. So this is usually my starting point. This is a great one. The other one that's incredibly effective is this Lucky Craft Flat CBD20. Now, as the name refers, it's kind of designed to get down that 20-foot zone. You can see it's a little flatter, maybe a little narrower than the Deep Six, not by much, right? Pretty similar, but this guy's gonna be a little more round in shape. This guy's gonna be a little flatter. You can see the lip is almost the same. They're both pretty long and pretty flat. So they're gonna kind of have a very similar performance, just a different profile, different sound. And that one. Right, so just a different sound. Sometimes they will react to one more so than the other. Fish it exactly the same way. Just get it down there, bang around the treetops, and it works incredibly well. Now, ultra deep baits. Getting down there, let's grind the shit as deep as we can go, right? I usually have a 3-prong approach to this. 2 that I spend probably 90% of my time on, and then 1 that certainly has its moments, so it's worth discussing. Now, these are baits that are gonna get down into that true 25 to 30 foot zone. And depending on if you want to, like, you know, let a ton of line out and long line this thing. Some guys will even throw these big baits on like 6 and 8 pound line, which is crazy, but just to maximize depth, you could get these down 32, 34, 35 feet if you're really daring enough to do it. But for me, you know, these bigger baits, I like to throw it on 16 to 20 pound line. I'm a straight fluoro kind of guy. And even on that heavier line, I could still get it down there in that 25 foot zone, no problem. These are big baits making a lot of ruckus. So here's where we go. So everybody in the world knows these 2 baits, Strike King 10XD and Strike King 8XD, arguably the best deep diving crankbaits really ever made. Now, there are places where they just flat want this 10XD. It wobbles super wide, it's super big, right? 8XD is gonna be just a little bit smaller version, and then so on and so forth, right? 6XD a little smaller, 5XD, so on and so forth. For me, the sweet spot of this lineup is the 8XD. The 8XD is one that I talk about a lot. I've got a ton of confidence in it. It's a big profile. It has a very wide lip. So you see how much wider this lip is than some of the other crankbaits we were discussing. As the water pushes against it, it has to move a long way before it can go back, right? So this gets a very wide movement. When it's down on the bottom grinding, you're getting full grind on that lip as it's bouncing around the bottom. So it's a great bait where you can actually feel what's happening. You can literally feel it change from one rock to another, pulling up over a rock, down, right? So if feeling the bottom and understanding the contour is important to you, this is an amazing one. It's really great for tackling that 20 to 25 foot zone. It's got lots of sound, okay? Super noisy, a ton of colors. If you guys end up getting into these, one quick word of advice: change these hooks before you do anything. Don't make a cast with stock Strike King hooks. Go to an Owner ST35 short shank treble or whatever treble hook you guys like, but definitely change them. The hardware on these suck. The bait, pretty damn awesome, okay? So 8XD is always one I keep around. Now, there are some parts of the country where they just flat smoke a 10XD, but the challenge to a 10XD, the bait is so big, it wobbles so wide and moves so wide that sometimes it can be really difficult to know what the bait is actually doing, right? You know what's on the ground, but it's got so much movement and so heavy that you can't really precisely tell everything that's happening like you can with the 8XD, right? So if I don't have to throw the 10XD, I choose to go this route. And this is the Megabass Big M 7.5. So this has replaced the 10XD for me 95% of the time. Sometimes, like I said, they just want the stupid 10XD, right? But if I can get by with this, this is a much easier, much more fun of a bait to throw. And you can see profile-wise, you still get that big profile that you guys love the 10XD for. But similarly to the 4.0, you've got this wider belly, thinner top, so you get deeper with this than the 10XD, and it's much easier to swim. So instead of having this really wide lip that's down there doing all this crazy shit, this is going to be a flashing crankbait. So it's going to have a lot of top to bottom movement and less big, wide side to side movement. So you can fish it all day, just like a mid-range crankbait. It's not going to wear your arm off. You can tell exactly what it's hitting. It just has a lot more precision to it. It's a lot more fun to fish, and the fish smoke it, right? So sometimes when they just want that big profile, this is the direction we go. Now, majority of time, those two cranks basically solve all of my, mega deep cranking needs. But there are times where they just want something a little bit different, a little bit tighter, and that's where the Duo Realis G87 crankbait comes into play. Now, they make a 15-foot diver and a 20-foot diver in this. Let me break it out for you guys. Now, this is going to be a much tighter wobble than the Strike King. Okay, you can see totally different lip design, right? Totally different bait design on there, right? This guy is going to dive virtually straight down, and it can get down into that 20-foot zone no problem on the heavier line. Sometimes when they're really, really picky and they've seen a lot of the same bait, they've seen a lot of 8XDs, they've seen a lot of 10XDs, right? You could throw the Duo. Hear that? Nothing, right? Quiet. So it does have a weight transfer ball in it, and then it snaps back into place, and then you really don't hear much once it's in that magnet, right? So loud when it casts, but then once it kind of snaps back, you're not really hearing a whole lot. So it's super finessey, right? So it's giving them an approach that they're not getting from everybody else that's throwing those bigger baits. Now, the reason it's not in my arsenal all the time is it's much more difficult to tell what this bait is doing on the bottom than it is with the Big M75 or the Strike King, right? Because these baits grind so well and you can feel everything that's happening, I just get used to knowing exactly what my bait is doing. With the Duo, it comes to a very narrow tip, right? You see how narrow that is. And this guy, really, because it's so tight, it's basically just going to kind of bounce as it's going through. So instead of it having this big grind that's transmitting info back to me where I can be like, okay, yep, it's on this rock, just changed to sand, this guy is just kind of tipping along. So I kind of know it's down there, right? I kind of know it's on the depth, it's in that 20-foot zone, but don't really know what it's hitting. So if transmission back from your bait is important to you, this isn't usually where I go. But when tightening it up, making it a little bit quieter, a little more natural presentation that can still get down to that deeper water is important. It's really hard to beat this guy. So it's definitely one you're going to want to keep in your arsenal for those times when they get a little picky and they get a little tougher. All right, now, RodReel combos for me on my deep crank stuff, pretty simple. All of my deep cranks go on the Megabass Orochi XX launcher. This rod is, without question for me, the best deep crank rod on the market, period. It doesn't kill you, it's a $300 rod, right? But it performs better than any of the $500, $600, $700, $800 rods that I have used. It's 7'11", so it's just under that 8-foot mark, so you can make big casts with these big baits. It's got a high lure rating. Even when you're throwing these Big M75s that weigh over 2 ounces, it handles it no problem. So you can push the envelope with it. It's got that great parabolic bend through the middle, so once they're hooked, they stay hooked, but it's got tons of power and enough sensitivity to where I know what's happening with it. As far as reels go, same thing as what I was discussing with the mid-depth crankbaits. I have a 6-to-1 on one of my launchers and I have a 7-to-1 on the other. Speed is really not a big deal here. In fact, I prefer the speed with the deep diving crankbait because for me, I'd say probably at least half of the time my bite comes at the end of my cast after that bait has got down to maximum depth and starts to hit things, boom, they eat it. And I'm 200 feet out there, I want that higher gear ratio to control the fish. Gone are the days for me that I need that 5-to-1 gear ratio, that real low gear ratio. Now, nothing wrong with it. If you guys want to go with that lower gear ratio, what that will do is that will just help absorb the grind, right? It will absorb a lot of that side-to-side movement and it will be enjoyable for you to fish. But I find if you use the right rod, like if you're using this launcher, it's doing all the work for you. It's absorbing all that head shake of the deep crank. So by the time it comes back to your hand, all you're doing is feeling it. Okay, this isn't wearing you out. You're not, overly grinded on this thing. It's a piece of cake to fish, right? I just prefer the higher gear ratio so I have more control once the fish are hooked. As far as line goes, 14 to 20 pound is usually my starting point. A lot of this is just going to depend on how deep I want the bait to go and where it's going to end up. 20 pound, if I can get away with it, is always where I like to go because I have so much confidence in it. And on some of these bigger baits like the Big M, the 8XD, they can still get to those zones on that 20 pound line. But there are times when I just need to get it a few feet deeper, get down to 25 foot, get down to 28 foot, maybe 30 foot. You're gonna have to drop down to a 14 or 16 pound line. Sunline Sniper is generally the line that I choose. It doesn't have a ton of stretch in it, and I don't need it because the rod is going to give me the bend and the softness that I need. So it keeps the bait responsive and I can feel everything back to my hand. All right, really quick, I just wanna touch base on this one more time. I mentioned it briefly, but really important with crankbaits that you guys pay attention to your hooks, right? The nature of a crankbait, these things are moving side to side and those hooks are flopping around. And when a fish eats, they're sucking at it, right? So they're gonna suck it, and there's just so many hooks kind of dangling on the bait that they're gonna get it very weird a lot of the times, right? So if there were no hooks, when they suck this thing, it would be back in their gullet. But these hooks are big, right? Because these are deep diving crankbaits. So you're gonna hook them on the outside of the face, you're gonna hook them on the side of the jaw, you're gonna hook them in all kinds of weird places. So it's critical that your hook be able to penetrate the fish and stay, right? So if you trust the hooks that come on the baits, great. A lot of these that we talked about come with great hooks and you don't have to change them right out of the box. Some of the other ones, if you guys are losing fish, it's typically 99% of the time it's because the hook didn't penetrate. These are the two hooks that I strongly recommend. I love this hook for crankbaits. This is the Owner ST635, STX35. This is the straight up Owner ST36. So this is a great one for long cast, smaller baits. When you're throwing lighter line, you just need maximum hook penetration. You can't go wrong with this. This guy holds them really good. This is the STY35. Where were you, Jeff?
I can't see.
I've said STX so many times. So I just call it the ST35. The
There you
Ys,
go.
the
Yeah,
X's,
come on.
who cares?
Just say ST.
It's the ST35, right? But this is a short shank hook that really sticks them well. When they are hooked on this thing, dude, you guys got them. So pay attention to the hooks, change them out. You will land a lot more fish. All right, guys, that is a wrap. I hope that was insightful to our approach on deep cranking. I know that was a lot of baits, but crankbaits are kind of like jerk baits to me. I geek out on this stuff. I love them so much. I have so much confidence in them, and I really appreciate what each bait does different. So I hope you guys will explore and do the same thing and figure out the sweet spot for each bait so that you guys can expand your crankbait offerings and catch a lot of big ones this season. If you guys have any questions on anything we covered, drop it down below in the comments and I will definitely get to it. Jeff will leave links to all these products in the description, so if you want to check them out, you can. Until next time, guys, jack them on these things, okay? Big ones, I want to see the pics. Thank you guys for watching. Peace out.